Thank you, Raj, for taking us on a journey. And with that journey, there are ways in which all of us kind of see the beauty and the gift of who we are in God's sight, just based on how we're seen and how we show up and how we're present with this world. As Raj was singing that song, and I knew it was going to be a part of today's worship service, I went back this week to a memory I had in third grade. I was visiting my aunt, her Aunt Hattie. She was a holy roller out of the family. And if you were cornered by Aunt Hattie, you were going to talk about Jesus. Or at least she was going to talk about Jesus, right? And so she corners me while I'm coloring. And before she leans in and has her Jesus appeal, she notices that I'm coloring. And I'm using a black crayon to color my face. And she looks at me and she says, "You're not black." And there was this moment of confusion because I'd had this anthem of young, gifted, and black being celebrated in my home. James Brown had released a song, "Say It Loud." I'm what? Black and I'm proud. You get it? You've heard it? But I was just in that moment, just confused. And then my Aunt Hattie, as I was coloring on a piece of paper similar to this one, she took a yellow crayon and colored a layer for the skin. And then she took a brown crayon and colored over that yellow to capture uniquely my complexion. And in that moment, I felt seen by my Aunt Hattie. And yes, she went on that week to talk about Jesus. So at a very early age, as I'm being formed with a racial identity, there's my Aunt Hattie helping me introduce like this identity I have in Jesus and this deep acceptance of who I am and the promise that God has for my life. I share that story because we live in a world where we always associate to some degree colors to experiences. Think about your favorite sports teams. You know the colors of the Broncos. You know the colors of the Avalanche. You know the colors of the Denver Nuggets. And sometimes as we represent colors, they don't always represent our heart or what we believe. Last week, I went to a Super Bowl party at a sports bar here in Denver. Never had that experience going to see the big game at a sports bar. And because I know I'm in Bronco territory, I chose to wear green to represent the Eagles. And I'm really glad that I did because I was surrounded by Eagles fans that were cheering against the Chiefs. But you know who I was rooting for in my heart? I was rooting for the Chiefs. My heart was aligned in one area, but yet my colors and my experience and what you saw communicated something different. And the truth about you and the truth about me is sometimes as we align our head with our heart, there's a disconnect. And the Bible understands this about who we are as human beings, with how we align our head and our heart. The heart is this place that becomes that seat of emotions for all of us. The emotions of love and sorrow. And as we're talking about with this particular sermon series, joy resides in our heart. In addition to being the seat of our emotions, our heart is also that place that becomes a way that we gauge the moral choices that we make. And the heart becomes a moral compass. And for many of us, dare I say all of us, our spiritual core is aligned with this sense that the heart guides us to embrace the beauty and the gift of acceptance. acceptance of our heart's desires to align with God, to follow God, and to be a part of what God's trying to accomplish for us. Jesus would say this about the heart, that you and I, any one of us, can be good at one moment, or we can be evil at one moment, yet it's the abundance of the heart. Words from our mouths flow. So how do we gauge acceptance from a measure of how we understand the preciousness of the abundance of our heart to follow God? Well, the good news is in the book of Jeremiah, the prophet gives a particular blessing that follows those that do the hard work of aligning their heart with their head. Jeremiah is speaking to a people that have a fickle heart. They gave the appearance that they were following God, but yet in their heart, their actions didn't always align with God's purposes for their lives. So I want you to receive today's scripture as a lens for what it means to pursue acceptance that allows you to see the beauty and the gift of everyone. And as Raj said a moment ago, how do we build this sacred community when we understand fully and deeply the beauty and gift of acceptance? And knowing that for all of us, there's this heart that's aligned purposefully with the will of God. So here's the reading from Jeremiah chapter 17, beginning at verse 7. The prophet reveals these words: "Happy are those who trust in the Lord, who rely on the Lord. They will be like trees planted by streams, whose roots reach down to the water. They won't fear drought when it comes. Their leaves will remain green. They won't be stressed in a time of drought or fail to bear fruit. The most cunning heart, it needs help. Who can figure it out?" And I pause right there at that moment here, because with that line that says the cunning heart is beyond help, who can figure it out? It's like the prophet is saying, what the? How do you trust me? And the prophet goes on and says that I, the Lord, probe the heart and discern hidden motives to give everyone what they deserve, the consequences of their deeds. What the prophet is reminding us in this scripture is that you and I always live with this sense that our heart can guide us in bewildering ways that always align with our head's truest sense of who we need and want to be. And what Jeremiah reminds us is that God invites us to be in a spirit of reflection on who we are, and God has the capacity to help us examine our motives, our intentions, and the flawed spaces of our heart. What God practices for the people of God in the book of Jeremiah is this invitation for you and I to know fully what it means to be on that pathway of acceptance. And the truth about you and the truth about me as we journey forward in relationships and we find our way in our relationship with God and with others, there are moments and times where we have to be self-reflective on acceptance. Because acceptance becomes that pathway where we recognize reality. We see the hard things of this world. We see the polarization of this world, and yet we see the opportunity in this world to journey forward. And it turns out that acceptance can be one of those pathways and runways back to joy. So as we've been studying this book, the Book of Joy, written by Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu has this quote that kind of really resonated with me this past week. It's here on the screen. He says, "We are meant to live in joy, and the acceptance of reality is the only place from which change can begin. If you and I want to live out a life that becomes more aligned with God's purpose for our lives and our journeys, and align our hearts in such a way that they're not flawed with bitterness and hatred and the stinginess of sharing our emotions with others, it begins with accepting the beauty and the gift of what it means to embrace acceptance. In that journey of embracing acceptance, it leads us to have empathy. And what empathy allows you and I to do is to recognize it's not enough to say we want to imagine what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. That's sort of abstract. That sort of reflection is sometimes self-serving. Imagine what we can do to walk in someone else's shoes, but instead empathy drives us to this place where we imagine, what is it like for you to walk in your shoes? As a person that may be experiencing mental health challenges, as a person that's aging and you're dealing with how your body may betray you, or socially in this world, are you seen as a white man or a black woman or an Asian business person? Empathy allows us to be on a journey where we experience the beauty and the gift of acceptance. There's a guy by the name of Sterling Brown. He makes this statement about empathy. He said, it begins with understanding life from another person's perspective. And for you and I to have some sense of what it means to experience joy, it can't be simply what the pastor says or what we sing about. It's your shared experience of how you've come to accept the reality of where you are. You've been able to journey through those spaces in your head and your heart that are misaligned. And out of the midst and journey and sometimes the agitation of that, you find this great God who just loves you where you are. And he wants to pour joy into your life. So at this moment, I want to invite you to do something we do at least once a month here at Trinity. And for some of you that need to head to Sunday school class, this may be that opportunity for you to journey away from this space. But I want you in a group of 2 or 3 folks, have a conversation with someone about this question on the screen. What has brought you joy in 2025? We're new in the year. We've been talking about joy for all this year here at Trinity. But it's your opportunity to share with someone in this space what it means for you to realize and embrace how acceptance has led you to a place of connection and discovery. And what has brought you joy in 2025. So if you don't mind, I'd love for you to turn and group up with a few folks and give you 4 minutes to have a conversation about something that's bringing you joy in 2025. And then Raj Jalari is going to bring us together as we sing our closing song, Gathering Our Hearts Together. So 1, 2, 3, go. Have a conversation, and we'll invite you back to close out service.